The sound of metal tools clanking, loud shouts, and the panicked cries of two adults filled the small suburban bedroom. Red and blue lights flashed against the walls through the blinds. Firefighters crowded into the tiny space, their boots thudding against the wooden floor. The whole scene looked like a nightmare. Two bodies, my husband Mark and a woman I had never met before that day, were glued together in the most humiliating position possible. They were screaming, sweating, thrashing, and begging for help, while the firefighters were trying to figure out how to separate them without tearing their skin apart. You need to step back," one firefighter said firmly, holding his hand up to stop me from getting closer. But I didn't move. I couldn't. I stood frozen at the doorway, my heart racing in my chest, my face burning, and my lips trembling between laughter and rage. My plan had worked, more than I could have imagined. And as the firefighters tried to gently pour solvents between their bodies and tug them apart, I thought to myself, this is the exact moment my life changed forever. But how did we get here? How did I, an ordinary woman, end up watching my cheating husband glued to another woman in front of half the neighborhood? Well, it all started months before that night. Mark and I had been married for 11 years. On the outside, we looked like the perfect American family, a two-story home in the suburbs, two kids who went to school with their hair neatly combed, and matching Christmas pajamas for our holiday cards. Everyone who saw us thought we had it all together. But inside the walls of our house, things weren't as picture-perfect as they looked. Mark used to be a kind man. Back when we first met in college, he was the type of guy who would open doors for strangers, stay late to help a classmate with homework, and buy hot coffee for a homeless veteran outside the library. That kindness was what made me fall in love with him. But somewhere along the way, that man disappeared. He started working long hours at the office. He came home tired, cold, distant. He would snap at the kids for leaving Legos on the floor. He barely touched me anymore. And when he did, it felt like a duty, not love. At first, I thought it was just stress. Everybody has hard seasons in marriage, right? So, I stayed patient. I cooked his favorite meals, left him little notes in his briefcase, rubbed his shoulders when he looked tired. I tried to remind him of the man I married. But instead of drawing closer, he drifted farther away. Then, one day, I found the first message. It was a text on his phone. I had picked it up by accident, meaning only to hand it to him after he left it on the kitchen counter. But the screen lit up, and there it was. "Can't wait to see you again tonight, Red Hot Hash." My stomach dropped. I remember standing there, frozen, the room spinning around me. My hands shook so badly that the phone almost slipped from my fingers. I told myself it had to be a misunderstanding. Maybe it was just a coworker being friendly. Maybe it wasn't what it looked like. But deep down, I knew. Still, I didn't say anything that night. Or the night after. Or the week after that. I watched him carefully, quietly. And every day, I saw more signs. Late nights at the office, sudden trips out of town, whispered phone calls he took in the garage. My heart broke piece by piece, but I told myself I needed proof before I confronted him. And that proof came one Saturday afternoon. Mark had told me he was going to play golf with some buddies, but something in my gut told me to follow him. So, I waited 10 minutes after he left, got into my car, and drove behind him, keeping just enough distance not to be noticed. Instead of heading to the golf course, he pulled into the parking lot of a cheap motel on the edge of town. And there she was, a woman with long blonde hair, hopping into his car like it was the most natural thing in the world. I sat in my car across the street, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Tears blurred my vision, but I couldn't look away. That was the day I decided something inside me had to change. Now, I've always been the kind of person who believes in kindness. My mom used to tell me when I was a kid, if you throw kindness into the world, it will come back to you. And for most of my life, I lived by that. I forgave easily. I gave people the benefit of the doubt. I believed that if I loved someone enough, they would love me back. But standing there in that car, watching my husband kiss another woman in broad daylight, I realized something. Sometimes kindness has to look different. Sometimes kindness means showing people the consequences of their actions, so they can never hurt you, or anyone else, like that again. That was when the plan started forming in my head. Weeks passed. I played the part of the loyal wife. I smiled. I cooked. I asked about his day. But secretly, I started preparing. One night, when he was in the shower, I checked the drawer by his nightstand. Sure enough, there it was, his little bottle of lube. That was when the idea hit me like a lightning bolt. What if, instead of crying in silence, I gave him a surprise he'd never forget? I researched. I experimented. I found the right product, industrial strength adhesive that looked almost identical in texture to the lube he always used. I made the swap carefully, making sure he wouldn't notice. And then, I waited. The night it happened was like any other. Mark said he was going out with his friends. I knew exactly what that meant. I tucked the kids into bed, kissed their foreheads, and sat in the living room with a glass of wine, pretending to watch TV. But inside, I was buzzing with nerves. Would it work? Would he notice? Would this finally be the moment when his lies caught up with him? Around midnight, the sound of sirens jolted me out of my thoughts. Bright red and blue lights lit up the street outside my window. At first, I thought it was just an accident nearby. But then I heard it. Shouts, screams, the unmistakable voice of my husband calling my name. I rushed to the bedroom. And there it was. Mark and the blonde woman were stuck together, their bodies glued in the most humiliating position. They were crying out in pain and shame, while firefighters worked desperately to separate them. Neighbors had gathered outside, whispering, pointing, taking videos on their phones. And I stood there in the doorway, watching the man who had broken my heart squirm, while the woman he chose over me sobbed uncontrollably. My chest heaved. My hands trembled. My whole body felt like it was vibrating with a storm of emotions: rage, relief, justice, sorrow, empowerment. This was the peak. The moment my old life shattered and something new began. But as the firefighters exchanged worried looks, muttering about how dangerous the situation was, I realized something terrifying. This wasn't over. In fact, it was only the beginning. And that night, the night I swapped my cheating husband's lube for glue and the firefighters had to pull them apart, was about to take a turn I never could have imagined. Because just as the chief turned toward me and asked, "We need to know exactly what's in that bottle," my stomach dropped. I hadn't planned for this part. The fire chief's words hung heavy in the air. "We need to know exactly what's in that bottle." All eyes turned to me. The firefighters, their gloves glistening with sweat, the blonde woman sobbing into the sheets, and Mark, my husband of 11 years, his face contorted in both pain and shame. Even the neighbors outside, peering through the curtains, seemed to be holding their breath. My throat went dry. My heart pounded, so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. This was the one question I hadn't prepared for. What was I supposed to say? "Oh, that's not lube, it's industrial strength adhesive, and I swapped it out because my husband can't keep a zipper closed"? If I admitted that, I'd go from betrayed wife to criminal in an instant. They could call the cops. I could be charged. I could lose my kids. So I forced a shaky breath and said, I don't know. That's his bottle, not mine." The fire chief narrowed his eyes, clearly unconvinced, but he didn't press further, not yet. Instead, he turned to his team. "We need more acetone. Carefully. We can't risk damaging their skin." The blonde woman let out a scream as another firefighter tried to gently apply a solvent between their locked bodies. Mark cursed, thrashing, his face red. And me. I just stood there, watching, the perfect picture of a stunned wife. Inside, though, a storm raged. The hours leading up to that moment replayed in my head like a film reel. The way Mark had kissed me on the cheek before leaving, like nothing was wrong. The way I tucked the kids into bed, whispering sweet dreams, as if my world wasn't about to collapse. The way I poured myself that glass of wine, hands shaking, waiting for fate to do its job. I had told myself this plan wasn't about revenge, it was about justice. About showing Mark that his choices had consequences. About protecting myself from a lifetime of being walked on. But now, with a room full of firefighters and neighbors whispering outside, it didn't feel so simple anymore. "Mommy, what's going on?" The small, sleepy voice made my stomach lurch. I spun around. There, at the top of the stairs, stood my daughter, Emily, her hair a mess of curls, clutching her stuffed rabbit. She rubbed her eyes, blinking at the flashing red and blue lights outside. Panic shot through me. She couldn't see this, not like this. Not her father, not that woman, not the chaos. "Sweetheart," I whispered, rushing over to her and kneeling down. "It's okay. There was just an accident. Daddy's fine." But Emily's gaze wandered past me into the bedroom. Her little face scrunched in confusion. "Why is Daddy screaming?" My chest tightened. I gathered her in my arms, hugging her close. "Shh, don't worry about it, baby. Go back to bed. I'll explain everything tomorrow." She hesitated, then nodded sleepily, letting me guide her back to her room. But as I tucked her in, I felt like the world was collapsing around me. Because no matter how hard I tried to protect her, this was already out of my hands. Back in the bedroom, the scene was even worse. The firefighters had brought in extra equipment. A medic was on standby with 4 fluids. Mark's face was pale now, twisted in pain, his voice hoarse from yelling. The blonde woman had stopped crying, and now just whimpered softly, staring at the ceiling like she wanted to vanish. And the chief? He kept looking at me, watching me, like he knew there was more to this story than I was saying. "Ma'am," he said again, stepping closer. "We really need to know what was in that bottle. If it's toxic, this could be dangerous." I swallowed hard. My palms were sweaty. My knees felt weak. "Think," I told myself. "Think fast." "It looked like regular lube," I stammered. "I've seen it in his drawer before. Maybe it was old. Maybe it went bad." The chief didn't look convinced, but before he could press further, a loud crash echoed from outside. One of the neighbors had dropped their phone on the sidewalk. And that's when I realized people were filming. Dozens of them. Phones pointed at my house, my windows, my husband. This wasn't just a private humiliation anymore. This was about to be plastered all over social media. Panic surged through me like fire. If those videos got out, everything would explode. My kids would see them one day. My family back in Ohio would see them. The whole world would know what happened in that bedroom. And maybe, just maybe, someone would piece it all together. Someone would realize that this wasn't just a freak accident. I had to act. "Can't you close the blinds?" I snapped at one of the firefighters. "People are filming." He glanced at the chief, uncertain. The chief sighed, then nodded. 2 firefighters rushed to pull the blinds shut, but the damage was already done. The neighborhood had seen enough. That was the low point, the helplessness of watching my private life become a public circus. But then came the high. As I stood there, trembling, one of the firefighters turned to me and said quietly, "Ma'am, whatever's going on here, you don't deserve this." "No one does." The words hit me like a wave. For the first time that night, someone wasn't looking at me like I was the villain, or the fool, or the clueless wife. Someone saw me, saw my pain. I wanted to cry, but I swallowed it down, nodding silently, holding on to those words like a lifeline. The firefighters kept working, spraying solvents, trying everything they could. Hours passed. Mark's breathing grew ragged. The blonde woman begged for painkillers. The tension in the room thickened until it felt like the walls themselves might crack. And then another extreme. One of the firefighters cursed under his breath. "Chief, we've got a problem." Everyone froze. The adhesive wasn't breaking down. The solvents weren't working fast enough. And their skin was starting to tear. If they pulled any harder, they could cause permanent damage. The chief ran a hand over his face, grim. "We may have to take them to the hospital. Emergency surgery." The room fell silent. Mark's eyes widened in horror. "What?" "No. You can't. Everyone will know." The blonde woman broke down again, sobbing. And me. I just stood there in the corner, my heart racing, my mind spinning. Because if they took him to the hospital, if this became a bigger scene, if doctors and reporters got involved, there was no way I could hide my part in it anymore. And that meant one thing. The secret I thought I could keep was about to explode. The chief's words hit the room like a thunderclap. "We may have to take them to the hospital. Emergency surgery." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. For a split second, even the blonde woman stopped crying. Her breath caught in her throat as her wide, tear-streaked eyes darted toward Mark. Mark's reaction was instant and feral. "No, you're not taking us anywhere. You can't." He twisted violently against the sheets, yanking, pulling, thrashing as though sheer force of will could free him. His face turned crimson, sweat poured down his temples, and his veins stood out like cords on his neck. The firefighters grabbed his arms, trying to steady him before he tore his own skin. "Sir, calm down. You're making it worse." But Mark wasn't listening. He kept shouting, "I'm not going to a hospital like this. Do you have any idea what that would do to me? To my career? To—" He froze mid-sentence, glancing toward the window where shadows of neighbors' silhouettes still lingered behind drawn blinds. His voice dropped into a bitter snarl. "They'll all know." The blonde woman whimpered, "Please, just fix this here. Please, don't let anyone else see us like this." And I stood against the wall, silent, every nerve in my body buzzing. On the surface, I looked like a wife in shock, hands clasped together, lips pressed tight, eyes wide. But inside was chaos, because the more Mark screamed about his career, his image, his precious reputation, the less guilt I felt. He wasn't worried about his kids. Not about me. Not about the pain. No, he was worried about himself. And for the first time in years, I realized something. Maybe kindness didn't mean protecting him anymore. Maybe kindness meant protecting me. "Chief, acetone isn't working fast enough," one of the firefighters muttered. "If we keep trying here, we risk infection. We need proper surgical tools." The blonde moaned in agony as another attempt to slide solvent between their bodies sent her into fresh spasms of pain. Her mascara had run down to her chin, and her hair stuck to her damp forehead. Mark clenched his jaw, glaring at me through his sweat and humiliation. And in that glare, I saw it, the silent accusation. Like he knew. Like he was blaming me already, even if he couldn't prove it. A shiver ran down my spine, but I lifted my chin, refusing to flinch. If he knew, what could he do? Admit it? Tell everyone his wife swapped his lube for glue? That would only confirm the cheating in front of the whole town. So I stood tall, silent, letting the guilt eat him instead of me. The chief sighed heavily, pinching the bridge of his nose. "We don't have a choice. Call it in. We're transporting." One of the firefighters pulled out a radio, speaking rapid codes I didn't understand. Within minutes, another siren joined the chaos. A stretcher was rolled inside, clattering against the hardwood floor. The blonde wailed, clinging to the sheets. "Please don't. Please, I can't." But there was no stopping it now. The firefighters gently lifted the pair, tangled together like some grotesque sculpture, and strapped them down as one unit. Mark's face burned with shame as straps tightened across his chest. He muttered through clenched teeth, "This isn't happening. This isn't happening." As they wheeled him toward the door, his eyes found mine again. And in that look, I saw rage. Pure, unfiltered rage. I swallowed hard, my stomach twisting. This wasn't over. Outside, the night had turned into a spectacle. Neighbors crowded the sidewalks, whispering behind their hands, holding up phones despite the firefighters barking at them to put them away. "Is that Mark?" one woman gasped, clutching her husband's arm. "Oh my God, look at them," another whispered, her voice trembling with excitement and disgust all at once. Phones clicked. Recordings buzzed. My perfect suburban life, the image I had polished for over a decade, was crumbling right there under the flashing lights. And yet, deep inside, I felt a strange rush. For years, I had been the quiet one, the forgiving wife, the woman who smiled at the PTA meetings, who baked cookies for the block party, who swallowed teas in silence. But tonight I wasn't invisible anymore. People were looking. People were whispering. And even though part of me was terrified, another part, the part that had been buried under years of betrayal, felt alive. The chief's voice cut through my thoughts. He stood in front of me now, blocking the crowd's view. "We're heading to St. Luke's. You'll need to come with us to answer some questions." My chest tightened. Questions? Yes. For the doctors. Mostly. We need to know if there's any chance they used something dangerous. His eyes searched mine carefully. Anything you might have seen in that bottle. There it was again. That probing. That suspicion. My hands shook, but I forced them into fists at my sides. Like I said, it looked normal. I don't know anything else. The chief didn't break eye contact for several seconds. Then he nodded slowly. "Fine. Let's go. The ambulance ride was chaos. Mark and the blonde whimpered on the stretcher, strapped down like unwilling passengers on some carnival ride from hell. The medics wiped frantically around them, applying cooling packs, dripping full fluids, checking vital signs. I sat in the corner, silent, clutching my purse so tightly my knuckles turned white. Every bump in the road jostled them, and every time, they both cried out in agony. It was a sound I'll never forget, raw, primal, the sound of two people trapped in their own worst nightmare. And though I hated him for what he'd done to me, though I hated her for being part of it, a tiny part of me flinched every time they cried. Because I had done this. At the hospital, things escalated quickly. Doctors swarmed. Nurses rushed them into a private surgical suite. I was left in a small waiting room under the watchful eye of the fire chief. I sat there, staring at the linoleum floor, my thoughts spiraling. Would they find out? Could the adhesive be traced? What would I say if they asked again? And then the worst thought of all. What if they didn't survive this? My stomach twisted. I had wanted justice, humiliation, consequences. But death? No. Never. The clock ticked. The hallway bustled. My heart wouldn't stop racing. Finally, the chief sat down across from me. His boots squeaked against the floor as he leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You know, he said quietly, I've seen a lot of strange things in this job. But this doesn't just happen. I froze, my pulse thundering in my ears. The chief tilted his head, studying me. You're sure you don't know anything about that bottle? My mouth opened, closed. The words were right there on my tongue. A confession, a release. But before I could speak, the double doors at the end of the hallway burst open. A nurse ran out, her face pale. Code Blue, she shouted. We're losing him. The hallway erupted in chaos. Doctors sprinted. Alarms blared. And my body went cold. Mark was dying. Code Blue. We're losing him. The nurse's scream shattered the waiting room like a hammer smashing glass. The world around me blurred. My vision tunneled, sound muffled, and for a second, it felt like I was watching everything from underwater. Doctors sprinted past, pushing carts loaded with machines. The overhead speakers crackled to life. Code Blue, OR2. Code Blue, OR2. I sat frozen in the waiting chair, my purse sliding from my lap to the floor. My throat closed, my chest burned, and my legs refused to move. Was this really happening? Was Mark, my cheating, lying, selfish husband, about to die on an operating table, glued to another woman? The fire chief rose to his feet instantly. Stay here, he ordered, his voice low and commanding. Then he disappeared with a flood of staff rushing toward the double doors. I wanted to obey. I wanted to stay rooted to the chair, small and invisible. But my body betrayed me. Before I knew it, I was on my feet, my hands trembling, my breath coming in short gasps. I stumbled forward, following the tide of nurses, ignoring the protests of a security guard. The doors swung shut before I could reach them, locking me out of the sterile chaos beyond. Through the small rectangular window, I caught glimpses, bright lights, gloved hands, a defibrillator being wheeled in. And then, I heard it. The flat, mechanical wail of a heart monitor. That long, unbroken beep that means only one thing. My knees buckled, and I gripped the doorframe for support. No, this can't be it. Not like this. For all the betrayal, all the lies, all the humiliation, I didn't want him to die. Not because I loved him, I wasn't sure I did anymore. But because death felt too final, too brutal. It would make me the villain forever, the woman who killed her husband with glue. And worst of all, how would I ever explain it to our kids? Emily's sweet, sleepy face flashed to my mind. My son Jacob's laugh. The way they still asked, "When's Daddy coming home?" A sob rose in my throat, but I swallowed it down, pressing my forehead against the cool glass of the door. Inside, the doctors worked furiously. One pressed on his chest. Another called for more AP. A nurse handed over paddles, and the doctor barked clear. Mark's body jolted violently as electricity coursed through him. The monitor flickered, sputtered, then flatlined again. Again. The paddles pressed. Another jolt. 4-3 heartbeats. Silence hung in the air. Then, beep, beep, beep. The sound of life. I exhaled a shaky breath, collapsing against the wall in relief. My body shook, tears spilling down my cheeks before I even realized I was crying. They stabilized him. For now. But the chief's warning from earlier echoed in my mind. This doesn't just happen. How much longer could I keep my secret buried before someone dug it up? Hours dragged by. I sat alone in the waiting room, staring at the faded magazines on the table. My fingers twisted the strap of my purse until the leather squeaked. Nurses walked past with hushed voices, their eyes occasionally flicking toward me. Finally, the doors swung open, and a doctor in green scrubs approached. His mask hung loose around his neck, and his face was drawn with exhaustion. "Mrs. Williams?" he asked. I nodded, my mouth dry. "Your husband is stable. We managed to restore his heart rhythm. But the situation is complicated." "Complicated how?" My voice cracked on the words. The doctor hesitated. The adhesive created extensive tissue damage. "They're still connected. Separation is going to require multiple procedures, possibly skin grafts. And there's risk of infection, especially since we had to use so many chemicals." My stomach churned. Infection. Grafts. More procedures. "What about?" I paused, unable to even say her name. "The other woman? She's stable as well, though she's experiencing severe trauma. We'll have to perform surgery on her too. Both patients will require a long recovery." I pressed a hand to my mouth, trying to process it. The doctor studied me, his eyes narrowing. "Mrs. Williams, do you have any idea how this could have happened? Industrial adhesive isn't something that just appears in a bottle of lubricant." My heart skipped. My palms went clammy. I don't know," I whispered, avoiding his gaze. "Maybe the factory made a mistake." The lie sounded flimsy even to my own ears. The doctor frowned, clearly unconvinced, but he didn't push. "Not yet." Instead, he nodded stiffly. "We'll keep you updated, but I recommend you contact family. This is going to be a long process." Then he walked away, leaving me alone with my racing thoughts. I should have felt relief. Mark was alive. The secret was still buried. But instead, a heavy dread pressed down on me. Because this wasn't the end, it was only the beginning of the fallout. By morning, the hospital waiting room had transformed into a circus. Reporters gathered outside, their cameras flashing, their voices shouting questions at anyone who walked through the front doors. Is it true a man and his mistress were glued together? Do you know the wife? Was it sabotage? Can you confirm the identities of the victims? Security guards struggled to hold them back, but the story had already escaped. Neighbors whispered. Friends texted. Social media exploded. And through it all, I kept my head down, clutching a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. Every vibration of my phone made my stomach twist. Every headline felt like a knife. And yet, part of me couldn't stop reading them. Suburban scandal, married man and mistress hospitalized after bizarre adhesive incident. Glue gate. Firefighters forced to rescue couple stuck in compromising position. Cheating husband exposed in humiliating fashion. It was everywhere. And though it terrified me, it also thrilled me. Because for once, he was the one humiliated. He was the one everyone whispered about. He was the one stripped of dignity, not me. But that high didn't last long. Around noon, as I sat scrolling headlines with trembling fingers, the fire chief approached again. "Mrs. Williams, we need to talk." I stiffened. "About what?" "About what really happened," he said, lowering his voice. "The doctors are saying this wasn't an accident. Someone switched that bottle." My chest tightened. They can prove that." "Not yet. But they're running tests. And if it turns out to be intentional," his gaze hardened, "that's assault. Maybe even attempted manslaughter, considering what happened in the OR." My blood ran cold. Assault. Manslaughter. Prison. My kids. Panic clawed up my throat. I don't know anything," I stammered, my voice breaking. "I swear I don't." The chief studied me for a long moment, his eyes sharp and unyielding. Then he nodded slowly. "Fine. But if you do know something, now's the time to come clean. Before someone else talks." And then he walked away, leaving me trembling in my seat. That was the low. But then came the next extreme. That night, as I prepared to leave the hospital, my phone buzzed with a new message from an unknown number. At first, I thought it was just another reporter. But when I opened it, my blood froze. It was a photo of my kitchen, taken through the window. The message read, "We know what you did. Pay up, or everyone else will know too." The message glowed on my phone's screen like a threat carved into stone. "We know what you did. Pay up, or everyone else will know too." And below it, the picture, my kitchen window, taken at night, blinds half open, the glow of my lamp spilling into the room. My heart stopped. My vision blurred. For a moment, I couldn't even breathe. Someone knew. Not suspected. Not guessed. Knew. They had been close enough to my house to take a picture. Close enough to watch me without me noticing. The walls of the hospital seemed to close in on me. My chest heaved, panic flooding every nerve in my body. I had told myself I was safe. That Mark would never expose me because it would expose his cheating, too. That the firefighters, the doctors, the neighbors, they only had suspicions, not proof. But now, proof existed. And it was in the hands of someone who wanted money. I bolted upright in the plastic hospital chair, nearly dropping my phone. My eyes darted around the waiting room, scanning faces. A tired father rocking his baby. An elderly woman knitting. A teenage boy slouched over his tablet. None of them looked threatening. None of them looked like blackmailers. But someone had been outside my house, watching, waiting. My palms went clammy. My stomach twisted. The phone buzzed again. $10,000. Cash. Tomorrow night. Or the world finds out. The room tilted. My mind raced. $10,000. I didn't even have that much in savings. We had been living paycheck to paycheck, barely scraping by on Mark's salary after his business trips and expenses. Where was I supposed to get that kind of money? And even if I did, how could I trust them not to expose me anyway? For a long time, I just sat there, frozen, staring at the words on the screen. I thought about deleting the message, pretending it didn't exist. But even if I did, the truth was still out there. Someone knew. And they weren't going away. That was the high-stakes extreme, the panic of being cornered. But the low came crashing in right after. Because the first thought that filled my head wasn't about me. It wasn't even about Mark. It was about Emily and Jacob. What would happen to them if I went to prison? If I lost everything? Would they end up with Mark, a man who couldn't even be faithful to their mother? Would they grow up resenting me, thinking I was some kind of monster? The image of Emily clutching her stuffed rabbit at the top of the stairs flashed in my mind. Her innocent eyes, her small voice asking, "Why is Daddy screaming?" Tears burned behind my eyes. I clenched the phone in my hand until my nails dug into my palm. I couldn't let this happen. I couldn't lose them. The fire chief's words echoed again in my mind. If you do know something, now's the time to come clean. Maybe he was right. Maybe confession was the safest way out. If I admitted what I had done, maybe I could spin it. Say it was an accident. Say I grabbed the wrong bottle. Say I never meant for it to go this far. But the thought of standing in front of strangers, of letting the world know I had glued my cheating husband to his mistress, it made my stomach churn. And besides, would they even believe it was an accident? No. Confession wasn't an option. That night, I drove home in a daze. The house looked different now. Smaller, darker, like it was shrinking under the weight of secrets. The kids were asleep, their backpacks tossed in the hallway, cereal bowls still in the sink. I locked the doors, double-checked the windows, pulled every blind shut. Then I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the place where the photo had been taken from outside. Who had stood there, watching me? A neighbor? A stranger? Someone who had followed me home from the hospital? The thought made my skin crawl. I barely slept that night. Every creak of the house made me jump. Every shadow looked like a figure outside the window. When I finally drifted off near dawn, I dreamed of Mark, his face pale, his chest convulsing under the defibrillator pads, his eyes boring into mine as he whispered, "This is your fault." I woke up drenched in sweat. The next day was a blur. I dropped the kids at school, forcing a smile as I kissed them goodbye. Then I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my hands hurt, staring at the school building like it might vanish if I looked away. How much longer would I have with them before everything fell apart? At the hospital, the The reporters were worse than ever. They shoved microphones in my face, shouting questions. Mrs. Williams, is it true your husband was caught with another woman? Do you know how the adhesive got into the bottle? Is it true the doctors had to resuscitate him? I shoved past them, my sunglasses barely hiding my swollen eyes. Inside, the halls buzzed with gossip. Nurses whispered when I walked by. A doctor raised an eyebrow, his eyes flicking to my wedding ring. I felt exposed. Naked. Like everyone already knew. In Mark's room, the scene was surreal. He lay in a hospital bed, hooked up to monitors, tubes snaking from his arms. His face was pale, his eyes closed. The blonde woman was in a separate bed nearby, equally motionless, her blonde hair spread across the pillow like a halo gone wrong. They looked like fallen statues, broken idols. For a moment, I just stood there, watching, my heart twisted in a knot of anger and sorrow. This was the man I had built a life with, the man who had promised me forever. And here he was, reduced to this. I wanted to feel pity. I wanted to feel love. But mostly, I felt empty. The quiet hum of machines filled the room. Nurses checked vitals. A doctor scribbled notes. And then, Mark's eyes fluttered open. Slowly, weakly, but they opened. His gaze found mine, and for a moment, we just stared at each other. I couldn't read his expression. Anger, blame, fear. Finally, he croaked, his voice raspy and broken. You did this. My breath caught. The nurse glanced up, frowning. Sir, you need to rest. But Mark's gaze never left mine. His lips curled into the faintest sneer. You tried to kill me. My knees buckled. I gripped the side of the bed for balance. The nurse hurried over, shushing him, adjusting his fall. That's enough talking, sir. Save your strength. But the damage was done. Mark knew. And Weiss, he wasn't going to stay quiet. That was the low, the moment I realized the one person who could destroy me most completely was awake and ready to do it. But then came the high. Because later that night, after the kids were in bed, after I had triple-checked every lock in the house, another message came through. We don't care what he says. As long as you pay us, no one else ever has to know. Attached was another photo. This time, it wasn't of my kitchen. It was of Emily, taken outside the school. Her little backpack on her shoulders, her curls bouncing as she skipped toward the doors. The message ended with 3 words that made my blood run cold. Don't test us. The photo burned into my mind long after the screen went dark. Emily, my sweet little girl, standing outside the school doors, clutching her rainbow backpack, her curls bouncing as she laughed at something Jacob had said. She was just a child, innocent, fragile, completely unaware that someone had been lurking nearby with a camera. And now they had her picture. The blackmail wasn't just about me anymore. It wasn't just about Mark, or the shame, or the money. It was about my children. The phone slipped from my hands onto the kitchen table, the screen face down, as if I could bury the threat by not looking at it. But the image was already tattooed into my mind. Don't test us. For a long time, I sat frozen in the chair, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure the kids upstairs could hear it. This wasn't just about reputation anymore. This wasn't about covering up what I had done to Mark. This was about survival. If I didn't pay, they wouldn't just expose me. They could hurt Emily, hurt Jacob. The thought made bile rise in my throat. I picked up the phone with trembling hands. My thumb hovered over the screen. $10,000. Cash. Tomorrow night. Or the world finds out. Don't test us. I had less than 24 hours to come up with money I didn't have. I thought about calling the police. But what would I even say? Hi, officer. Someone is blackmailing me because I glued my cheating husband to his mistress, and now they are threatening my children. They'd lock me up before I even finished the sentence. No. The police weren't an option. That night, sleep was impossible. I lay awake in bed, listening to the creaks of the house, every sound magnified by fear. My mind spun through every possibility, every horrible scenario. What if they grabbed Emily after school? What if Jacob wandered off at recess and never came back? Every shadow outside the window looked like a stranger waiting to pounce. Every car that slowed down on the street made me flinch. By 3 a.m., my body ached with exhaustion, but my mind wouldn't stop. I had to do something. Morning came too soon. I stumbled into the kitchen, bleary-eyed, forcing a smile for the kids as they chattered over cereal. Jacob spilled milk on the table. Emily giggled as he wiped it with too much paper towel. They were so normal, so innocent, and I was sending them out into a world where someone was watching them. My chest tightened. "I'll drive you to school today," I blurted, grabbing my keys before they could argue. They looked at me, surprised. I usually let them take the bus. "Really?" Emily asked, her eyes lighting up. "Really?" I forced a smile. "I just want to spend more time with you guys." At the school drop-off line, I scanned every car, every adult waiting near the entrance. Was it the man in the red hoodie? The woman with sunglasses too big for her face? The older guy sitting in his parked car across the street? Any of them could have been the one. I walked Emily and Jacob all the way to the front doors, ignoring the confused look the teacher gave me. "Have a good day. Mommy loves you," I whispered, hugging them tight. And as they disappeared inside, my phone buzzed again. "Good choice. Keep them safe. Tomorrow night. Don't be late." That was the high, the suffocating terror of knowing my kids were pawns in a dangerous game. But after the storm of fear came the quiet low. I went back home and sat at the kitchen table, my head in my hands. How had my life come to this? Just a few weeks ago, my biggest problem was Mark's late nights, the empty excuses, the lipstick stains I pretended not to see. I thought catching him cheating would be the end of my heartbreak. But now, I wasn't just a betrayed wife. I was the one who had set this entire nightmare into motion. And my children were paying the price. The doorbell rang suddenly, jolting me upright. My heart leapt into my throat. Was it them? Slowly, cautiously, I peered through the peephole. It was Mrs. Carter, my neighbor, the one who always brought over zucchini bread from her garden in the summer. I opened the door a crack. "Hi, honey," she said, her smile warm but tired. "I just wanted to check on you. I saw the news. About you know." Heat rushed to my face. Of course she had. Everyone had. "I'm fine," I lied, gripping the doorframe. She reached out, placing a gentle hand on mine. "If you need anything, don't be afraid to ask. I know people can be cruel when they gossip, but you're not alone." Her kindness made tears well in my eyes. "Thank you," I whispered, my throat tight. It was a reminder, amid all the fear and the lies, that not everyone in the world was against me. But the peace didn't last long. That afternoon, when I picked up the kids, another text came. "Bring the money to the abandoned train yard. 9 p.m. alone. If we see cops, the pictures go viral." My stomach dropped. The abandoned train yard was 3 towns over. Remote. Empty. The perfect place for something terrible to happen. I spent the evening pacing the kitchen, my mind spiraling. I didn't have $10,000. Not even close. Mark's bank accounts were locked after his hospitalization. My own savings barely covered rent and groceries. What was I supposed to do? Walk into the train yard with a couple $100 and hope for mercy? Mercy from someone who had photographed my daughter without me knowing? No. Mercy wasn't part of this game. Desperation clawed at me. I opened Mark's desk drawers, rifling through papers, searching for anything. Old checks, cash hidden in envelopes. Nothing. I yanked open the bottom drawer and froze. There it was. A pistol. Small. Black. Cold. I stared at it, my breath catching. I hadn't even known Mark owned a gun. I reached for it slowly, my hands trembling as I lifted it out. The weight of it was terrifying. Heavy. Real. Could I actually use it? The thought made me sick. But then Emily's face flashed in my mind again, the photo of her at school. If it came down to protecting her, or doing nothing. I set the gun on the table, my decision hanging in the air like a storm cloud. By 8:30 p.m., I was in my car, the pistol hidden in my purse, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The streets blurred past. Every red light felt like a trap. When I pulled into the abandoned train yard, the place was even darker, emptier than I had imagined. Rusted tracks twisted through weeds. Broken train cars loomed like shadows of a forgotten world. I parked, my headlights cutting through the gloom. The phone buzzed again. "Get out!" Walked to the second car on the left. My heart thundered. My palms slick with sweat. I stepped out of the car, clutching my purse close. The night air was cold, silent, except for the crunch of gravel under my shoes. I walked slowly, scanning every shadow. Second car on the left. I reached it, my breath shallow. "Hello!" I called softly, my voice shaking. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then footsteps. A figure emerged from the darkness. Tall, hood pulled low, face hidden. "Do you have the money?" the voice rasped. I swallowed hard. I don't have 10,000. Not yet. But I can." The figure stepped closer, and moonlight glinted off something in their hand. Not a phone. A knife. My blood ran cold. The glint of the blade caught the thin slice of moonlight, and my entire body froze. The hooded figure stepped closer, boots crunching against the gravel, the knife steady in their hand. My heart pounded, so loud it drowned out the crickets, the wind, everything. "Do you have the money?" the voice repeated, sharper this time, the edge of command slicing through the night air. My mouth went dry. My tongue felt heavy. I don't have all of it," I stammered, my hands tightening on my purse strap. "But I can get it. Please. Just give me more time." The figure tilted their head, the hood casting their face in shadows. They moved the knife ever so slightly, the metal gleaming. "Time isn't free," they said, "and neither are mistakes." The words sent a shiver through me. My legs trembled, but I forced myself to stay upright. "I swear I'll get it," I whispered, my voice barely audible. The figure chuckled low, the sound muffled, menacing. "Your husband's still in that hospital bed," they said, each word deliberate. "It'd be real easy for someone to finish the job." My stomach lurched. Mark. Even after everything he'd done, after the betrayal and the lies, the thought of someone creeping into his hospital room to kill him made bile rise in my throat. "Don't," I begged. "Please, don't hurt him." The figure stepped closer still. The knife was now just a foot away from my chest. "You've got until Friday," they said. 10,000. Cash. No excuses. Then, quick as lightning, they lifted the knife and pressed the cold, flat edge against my cheek that I couldn't breathe. My skin prickled where the blade touched. "Or next time," the voice hissed, "it won't be your husband we cut." The image of Emily's smiling face flashed in my mind. Jacob's laugh. Their little hands reaching for mine. My knees buckled, and I nearly collapsed. The figure laughed, stepping back into the shadows. "See you soon, sweetheart." And then, silence. The darkness swallowed them whole, leaving me alone in the deserted train yard with my heart racing, my pulse thundering in my ears. I staggered back to my car, fumbling with the keys, slamming the door shut as if it could keep the danger out. My hands shook so badly I dropped the keys twice before starting the engine. The drive home was a blur of headlights and tears. When I pulled into my driveway, I didn't go inside right away. I just sat in the car, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Friday. I had less than 3 days to find $10,000, or my family would pay the price. That was the high, the knife, the threat, the chilling ultimatum. But the low came the next morning, when I woke up to the sound of Emily humming in the kitchen. She stood on a stool, pouring milk into her cereal, her curls bouncing as she sang a little tune from her cartoons. Jacob sat beside her, tapping his spoon against the bowl in rhythm. It was such a normal, innocent scene, and it broke me. Tears welled in my eyes as I leaned against the doorway, watching them. They didn't know. They couldn't know. To them, I was just Mom. The safe place. The protector. But I wasn't safe anymore, and I wasn't sure I could protect them. "Mommy." Emily looked up, her big eyes curious. "Why are you crying?" I forced a smile through the tears. "I'm just happy. Happy to see you both." Jacob rolled his eyes. "You're weird, Mom." Emily giggled, shoving a spoonful of cereal into her mouth. I laughed weakly, wiping at my cheeks, but inside, my heart was crumbling. That afternoon, I sat at the kitchen table with a notepad and pen, scribbling numbers. Savings, $1,200. Emergency fund, $500. Hidden cash in the cookie jar, $220. Total, $1,920. Not even close. I chewed the end of the pen, my thoughts racing. Could I pawn jewelry? Sell the TV? Borrow from family? But even if I sold everything I owned, it wouldn't amount to 10,000. I thought about asking the bank for a loan, but what would I tell them? And even if they approved, it wouldn't happen fast enough. My chest tightened. Every option seemed impossible. The truth settled over me like a heavy blanket. I was trapped. That night, after putting the kids to bed, I sat in the dark living room, staring at the gun on the coffee table. The same thought circled in my mind, over and over. Maybe I couldn't outpay them. But maybe I could outlast them. If I scared them off. If I fought back. But the idea of pulling the trigger, of ending a life, even one that threatened mine, made me sick. I closed my eyes, my body shaking with sobs. I didn't want to be this person. I didn't want any of this. The next day at the hospital, things only got worse. Mark was awake, stronger now, though still pale. The mistress, her name was Claire, I finally learned, had been discharged, but Mark remained under close watch. When I walked in, he looked at me with eyes sharp as knives. "You'll pay for this," he rasped, his voice stronger than before. I froze at the door. "Mark! You tried to kill me," he hissed. "You glued me like some sick joke. Do you think anyone's going to believe you didn't mean it?" My throat closed. I couldn't speak. "You're finished, Laura," he said, leaning back against the pillow. "As soon as I'm out of here, I'll make sure of it." Tears burned my eyes, but I held them back, because behind his threats, I saw something else in his gaze. Fear. He wasn't just angry. He was scared. And maybe, just maybe, he knew more about this blackmail than I realized. That was the low, the crushing weight of Mark's blame, his threats. But the high came later that night, when I was tucking Emily into bed. She held her stuffed rabbit tight, her eyes wide in the dark. "Mommy," she whispered. "Yes, sweetheart." "There was a man outside school today," she said softly. "He was standing by the fence. He kept looking at me." My blood ran cold. "What did he look like?" I asked quickly, trying to keep my voice calm. She shrugged. "I don't know. He had a hat. But he smiled at me. A weird smile." My chest constricted. He was getting bolder. The blackmailer wasn't just hiding in shadows anymore. He was showing himself, watching my children. A chill swept through me, because suddenly the threat wasn't about money, or photos, or even Mark. It was about how far this person was willing to go. And I realized, with terrifying clarity, that they weren't just bluffing. They were escalating. That Emily's words rang in my ears long after she drifted into sleep, clutching her stuffed rabbit with tiny fists. A man was outside school today. He smiled at me. A weird smile. The image seared itself into my mind. A stranger, standing at the fence, watching my daughter. Smiling. That wasn't an accident. That wasn't coincidence. It was a message. They weren't hiding anymore. They wanted me to know how close they could get. I sat in the hallway outside her room, my back against the wall, knees pulled to my chest. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the heater and Jacob's occasional snores from down the hall. But I couldn't breathe. Every creak of the house felt like footsteps. Every passing car outside felt like a predator circling. My chest tightened, my heart pounding so hard it made me dizzy. For the first time since this nightmare began, I realized I might not be able to protect them. Not Mark. Not the house. Not even myself. And that thought shattered me. Morning came like a slap to the face. I stood at the stove, flipping pancakes for the kids, my movements mechanical. The smell of butter and syrup filled the kitchen, but I couldn't taste it, couldn't feel it. Emily sat at the table, swinging her legs, humming. Jacob argued about which cartoon to watch after school. It was all so normal. And yet, every fiber of me screamed, they're in danger. They're in danger right now. Mom! Jacob's voice snapped me out of my trance. You burned it. I looked down. The pancake on the skillet was blackened, smoke curling up toward the ceiling. Oh, sorry. I forced a laugh, scraping it into the trash. But inside, panic chewed at me. How long could I keep pretending? At the school drop-off line, my paranoia peaked. I parked the car and scanned every face in the crowd. Parents, teachers, the crossing guard waving cheerfully. Any of them could be him. Or none of them. I walked the kids to the door, my eyes darting around like a trapped animal. And then, I saw him. Far down the fence line, leaning casually against a post. Baseball cap pulled low. Jacket zipped up. Too far to make out his face. But I knew. I just knew. The blackmailer. His head tilted slightly, almost like a nod. Then he turned and walked away. I stood frozen, my stomach twisting into knots. He wanted me to see him. He wanted me to know he could get this close. That was the high, the terror of knowing he was watching my children in broad daylight. But the low came crashing in when I got to the hospital later that day. Mark was stronger now, sitting upright in bed, sipping water. His face was pale, but his eyes burned with venom when they met mine. "You look like hell," he muttered. I didn't answer. "You think you're the victim here, don't you?" His voice was raspy but sharp. "But you're not. You're a monster. You glued me. You humiliated me. And now everyone knows." Tay stung my eyes, but I clenched my jaw. "You did this to yourself," I whispered. "You cheated. You lied. You destroyed us." He froze mid-sentence, glancing toward the window where shadows of neighbors' silhouettes still lingered behind drawn blinds. His voice dropped into a bitter snarl. "They'll all know." The blonde woman whimpered. "Please, just fix this here. Please, don't let anyone else see us like this." And I stood against the wall, silent, every nerve in my body buzzing. On the surface, I looked like a wife in shock, hands clasped together, lips pressed tight, eyes wide. But inside was chaos, because the more Mark screamed about his career, his image, his precious reputation, the less guilt I felt. He wasn't worried about his kids. Not about me. Not about the pain. No, he was worried about himself. And for the first time in years, I realized something. Maybe kindness didn't mean protecting him anymore. Maybe kindness meant protecting me. "Chief, acetone isn't working fast enough," one of the firefighters muttered. "If we keep trying here, we risk infection. We need proper surgical tools." The blonde moaned in agony as another attempt to slide solvent between their bodies sent her into fresh spasms of pain. Her mascara had run down to her chin, and her hair stuck to her damp forehead. Mark clenched his jaw, glaring at me through his sweat and humiliation. And in that glare, I saw it, the silent accusation. Like he knew. Like he was blaming me already, even if he couldn't prove it. A shiver ran down my spine, but I lifted my chin, refusing to flinch. If he knew, what could he do? Admit it? Tell everyone his wife swapped his lube for glue? That would only confirm the cheating in front of the whole town. So I stood tall, silent, letting the guilt eat him instead of me. The chief sighed heavily, pinching the bridge of his nose. "We don't have a choice. Call it in. We're transporting." One of the firefighters pulled out a radio, speaking rapid codes I didn't understand. Within minutes, another siren joined the chaos. A stretcher was rolled inside, clattering against the hardwood floor. The blonde wailed, clinging to the sheets. "Please don't. Please, I can't." But there was no stopping it now. The firefighters gently lifted the pair, tangled together like some grotesque sculpture, and strapped them down as one unit. Mark's face burned with shame as straps tightened across his chest. He muttered through clenched teeth, "This isn't happening. This isn't happening." As they wheeled him toward the door, his eyes found mine again. And in that look, I saw rage. Pure, unfiltered rage. I swallowed hard, my stomach twisting. This wasn't over. Outside, the night had turned into a spectacle. Neighbors crowded the sidewalks, whispering behind their hands, holding up phones despite the firefighters barking at them to put them away. "Is that Mark?" one woman gasped, clutching her husband's arm. "Oh my God, look at them," another whispered, her voice trembling with excitement and disgust all at once. Phones clicked. Recordings buzzed. My perfect suburban life, the image I had polished for over a decade, was crumbling right there under the flashing lights. And yet, deep inside, I felt a strange rush. For years, I had been the quiet one, the forgiving wife, the woman who smiled at the PTA meetings, who baked cookies for the block party, who swallowed teas in silence. But tonight I wasn't invisible anymore. People were looking. People were whispering. And even though part of me was terrified, another part, the part that had been buried under years of betrayal, felt alive. The chief's voice cut through my thoughts. He stood in front of me now, blocking the crowd's view. We're heading to St. Luke's. You'll need to come with us to answer some questions. My chest tightened. Questions? Yes. For the doctors. Mostly. We need to know if there's any chance they used something dangerous. His eyes searched mine carefully. Anything you might have seen in that bottle. There it was again. That probing. That suspicion. My hands shook, but I forced them into fists at my sides. Like I said, it looked normal. I don't know anything else. The chief didn't break eye contact for several seconds. Then he nodded slowly. Fine. Let's go. The ambulance ride was chaos. Mark and the blonde whimpered on the stretcher, strapped down like unwilling passengers on some carnival ride from hell. The medics worked frantically around them, applying cooling packs, dripping full fluids, checking vital signs. I sat in the corner, silent, clutching my purse so tightly my knuckles turned white. Every bump in the road jostled them, and every time, they both cried out in agony. It was a sound I'll never forget, raw, primal, the sound of two people trapped in their own worst nightmare. And though I hated him for what he'd done to me, though I hated her for being part of it, a tiny part of me flinched every time they cried. Because I had done this. At the hospital, things escalated quickly. Doctors swarmed. Nurses rushed them into a private surgical suite. I was left in a small waiting room under the watchful eye of the fire chief. I sat there, staring at the linoleum floor, my thoughts spiraling. Would they find out? Could the adhesive be traced? What would I say if they asked again? And then the worst thought of all. What if they didn't survive this? My stomach twisted. I had wanted justice, humiliation, consequences. But death? No. Never. The clock ticked. The hallway bustled. My heart wouldn't stop racing. Finally, the chief sat down across from me. His boots squeaked against the floor as he leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You know, he said quietly, I've seen a lot of strange things in this job. But this doesn't just happen. I froze, my pulse thundering in my ears. The chief tilted his head, studying me. You're sure you don't know anything about that bottle? My mouth opened, closed. The words were right there on my tongue. A confession, a release. But before I could speak, the double doors at the end of the hallway burst open. A nurse ran out, her face pale. Code blue, she shouted. We're losing him. The hallway erupted in chaos. Doctors sprinted. Alarms blared. And my body went cold. Mark was dying. Code blue. We're losing him. The nurse's scream shattered the waiting room like a hammer smashing glass. The world around me blurred. My vision tunneled, sound muffled, and for a second, it felt like I was watching everything from underwater. Doctors sprinted past, pushing carts loaded with machines. The overhead speakers crackled to life. Code blue, OR2. Code blue, OR2. I sat frozen in the waiting chair, my purse sliding from my lap to the floor. My throat closed, my chest burned, and my legs refused to move. Was this really happening? Was Mark, my cheating, lying, selfish husband, about to die on an operating table, glued to another woman? The fire chief rose to his feet instantly. Stay here, he ordered, his voice low and commanding. Then he disappeared with the flood of staff rushing toward the double doors. I wanted to obey. I wanted to stay rooted to the chair, small and invisible. But my body betrayed me. Before I knew it, I was on my feet, my hands trembling, my breath coming in short gasps. I stumbled forward, following the tide of nurses, ignoring the protests of a security guard. The doors swung shut before I could reach them, locking me out of the sterile chaos beyond. Through the small rectangular window, I caught glimpses, bright lights, gloved hands, a defibrillator being wheeled in. And then, I heard it. Mark hadn't just been cheating. He'd been planning, manipulating, setting me up to take the fall. And Kyle, pathetic, desperate Kyle, was his pawn. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The texts, the threats, The way Mark smirked in the hospital, so sure he'd win. This wasn't random blackmail. This was revenge. Sirens wailed in the distance. My chest tightened. Someone must have heard the gunshot. Panic surged through me. If the police found me here, with a gun, standing over Mark's bleeding friend, what would they think? My breath came fast, ragged. I had to make a choice. Run, or stay. I thought of Emily. Jacob. Running would mean abandoning them, becoming the monster Mark already painted me as. Staying might mean losing them anyway. But I couldn't run. Not anymore. I picked up the gun with trembling hands and tossed it far across the gravel, the clatter echoing. Then I raised my hands in the air, my body shaking, as the red and blue lights flashed across the train yard. The next hours blurred together in a haze of flashing cameras, shouting voices, cold handcuffs. At the station, they grilled me with questions. Why was I there? Why did I have a gun? Who were the men? I told them everything. The blackmail, the threats, the man outside my daughter's school. Kyle's confession. They didn't believe me at first. I saw it in their eyes, the suspicion, the doubt. Crazy wife. Bitter divorce. Lashing out. But then, Kyle cracked. Maybe it was the pain. Maybe it was the shock of being caught. But in the interrogation room next to mine, his voice carried through the thin walls. He told them everything. About the plan. About the texts. About how Mark had orchestrated it all from the beginning. By the time the officers returned, their faces were grim. "You're free to go," one said quietly. "For now." The next week was a blur of court dates and headlines. Husband's co-worker arrested in extortion plot. Hospital patient linked to blackmail scheme. Cheating husband faces new charges. The world finally saw Mark for who he really was. Not the charming father. Not the hard-working provider. But the liar. The manipulator. The man who would rather destroy me than admit his own failures. And for the first time in months, I could breathe. It wasn't easy. The kids had nightmares. Emily woke up screaming about men at the fence. Jacob asked if Daddy was coming home. I didn't have all the answers, but I held them tight, whispering promises I prayed I could keep. We'd be okay. We'd be safe. Because finally, the truth was out. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching Emily chase fireflies while Jacob rode his bike in the driveway. The world felt quiet, peaceful. And though scars remained, I knew something deep in my bones. I wasn't broken. I wasn't weak. I was still standing. And I always would. If you made it this far, thank you for sticking with me through this wild ride. If you enjoyed this story and want more twisted, suspenseful tales like this, make sure to upvote, share, and follow. Your support means the world. It helps me keep writing stories that keep you on the edge of your seat.